A cop gets an emergency call from a little boy, and when he arrives at the scene, he is shocked to discover that it's his own son. The afternoon sun beat down on the patrol car as Officer Michael Rodriguez guided it slowly through the streets of a low-income neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The car's air conditioning hummed softly, providing welcome relief from the oppressive heat outside. Michael's eyes scanned the dilapidated buildings and overgrown yards, staying alert for any signs of trouble. His partner Robin sat in the passenger seat sipping from a water bottle. "Pretty quiet today," she remarked. Michael nodded. "Yeah, almost too quiet. Makes me wonder what's brewing under the surface." They continued their patrol in companionable silence for a few more minutes. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life with an urgent message from dispatch. "All units in the vicinity of Oakwood, we have a 911 call that needs immediate investigation." A young boy's voice, very faint, said only, "Send help," before the line went dead. "We have an approximate location based on cell tower pings. Address is 1542 Sycamore Street." Michael and Robin exchanged a concerned glance. "That's just a few blocks from here," Robin said, already pulling up the location on the car's GPS. 10-4, dispatch, Michael responded into the radio. "This is Unit 247. We're en route to 1542 Sycamore now. ETA 3 minutes. He flipped on the sirens and accelerated, weaving through the sparse afternoon traffic. As they drove, the neighborhood grew increasingly run down. Abandoned cars lined the streets, their rusted frames a testament to years of neglect. Yards were overgrown with weeds, dotted with piles of trash and discarded furniture. "I've got a bad feeling about this one," Robin murmured, her hand resting on her holstered weapon. Michael nodded grimly. "Yeah, me too. Be ready for anything when we get there." The wail of the sirens seemed to echo off the crumbling buildings as they sped towards their destination, both officers steeling themselves for whatever they might find. As they pulled up to 1542 Sycamore Street, Michael's stomach tightened. The house before them was a picture of decay and neglect. Paint peeled from the weathered siding in long strips, revealing rotting wood underneath. Several of the windows were boarded up, while others had cracked or missing panes. The front porch sagged dangerously, its steps warped and broken. The yard was a tangle of dead grass and weeds, littered with trash and debris. An old refrigerator lay on its side near the curb, its door hanging open like a gaping mouth. "Jesus," Robin muttered as they exited the patrol car. "This place looks abandoned." Michael nodded, his eyes scanning the property for any signs of life. "Stay alert," he warned. "Could be squatters or worse." They approached the front door cautiously, hands hovering near their weapons. Robin rapped firmly on the peeling wood. "Police, is anyone home? We received a call for help at this address." Silence greeted them. Michael strained his ears, listening for any sound from within the house. Nothing. Robin tried again, her voice louder. "This is the police. If anyone's inside, please come to the door." Still no response. The quiet felt heavy, oppressive. "Let's try the door," Michael suggested. He reached for the knob, but it refused to budge. "Locked," he reported. They exchanged a worried glance before Michael spoke into his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 247 at 1542 Sycamore. No response at the door. Request permission to enter the premises." 10-4-247, permission granted. Use caution. With Robin covering him, Michael tried to force the door open, but it held firm. "Too solid," he grunted. "Let's check around back." They made their way around the side of the house, pushing through overgrown bushes. The backyard was just as neglected as the front, with waist-high weeds and piles of junk scattered about. As they picked their way through the mess, Michael's foot caught on something partially hidden in the tall grass. He stumbled, barely catching himself. "You okay?" Robin asked, reaching out to steady him. Michael nodded, then bent down to see what he'd tripped over. His breath caught in his throat as he pushed aside the weeds, revealing a small, rusted tricycle. Nearby lay other toys, a broken plastic dump truck, a faded baseball, a tattered stuffed animal. "Robin," he said quietly, gesturing to the abandoned playthings. His partner's face tightened. Recent activity, she noted. These haven't been out here that long. Michael stood, a chill running down his spine despite the heat. Something's very wrong here, he muttered. We need to get inside that house. Back at the front of the house, Michael keyed his radio again. Dispatch, this is Unit 247. We've found evidence of recent child activity, but no response from inside. Requesting backup for forced entry. Copy that, 247. Backup is on the way. ETA 5 minutes. As they waited, curious faces began to appear in neighboring windows and doorways. A few people ventured out onto their porches, watching the scene unfold with wary interest. Not exactly a welcoming crowd, Robin observed quietly. Michael nodded. This neighborhood had a history of hostility towards law enforcement. He hoped their presence wouldn't escalate into something uglier. Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived, their occupants joining Michael and Robin on the overgrown lawn. "What's the situation?" asked Officer Jensen, a veteran cop Michael had worked with before. Michael quickly briefed the newcomers on what they'd found and their suspicions. "We need to get in there ASAP," he concluded. "That 911 call. If there's a kid in trouble, every second counts." Jensen nodded grimly. "All right, let's do this by the book. Hernandez, you and Garcia cover the back in case anyone tries to bolt. Robin, you're with me on entry. Michael, you take point once we're in." Everyone moved into position. Michael's heart raced as he prepared himself for what they might find inside. The neighborhood had fallen eerily quiet. The only sound, the crackle of a police radio and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. "On 3, Jensen said, positioning himself in front of the door. 1, 2, 3. With a thunderous crash, Jensen's boot connected with the door. The old wood splintered, the lock tearing free from the rotted frame. As the door flew open, a wave of stench rolled out, so potent it made Michael gag. The smell was a nauseating cocktail of urine, feces, and decay. It spoke of long-term neglect and suffering. Michael fought down the urge to vomit, forcing himself to breathe through his mouth as he stepped into the darkened interior. "Police!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the gloom. "Anyone here? Call out if you need help." Only silence answered him. Michael's flashlight beam cut through the murky darkness of the house's interior, revealing a scene of squalor that made his stomach churn. He found himself in what must have once been the kitchen, though it was barely recognizable as such now. Every surface was covered in filth. Moldy food containers and takeout boxes were scattered across the counters and floor. The sink overflowed with dishes caked in weeks, possibly months, of crusted-on food. A thick layer of grease coated everything, giving the room a slimy sheen in the flashlight's glow. The refrigerator door hung open, its interior dark and reeking. Michael didn't dare look too closely at its contents. Clouds of flies rose from various piles of garbage as he moved through the room. "Clear," he called out, his voice muffled by the arm he held over his nose and mouth. From the living room he heard Robin's voice. "Clear here too, but you need to see this." Michael made his way carefully through the debris-strewn hallway to join his partner. The living room was in no better condition than the kitchen. Torn, stained furniture was haphazardly arranged around a TV that looked like it hadn't worked in years. Empty liquor bottles littered every surface. But it was what Robin was pointing to that caught Michael's attention. On a grimy coffee table lay an assortment of drug paraphernalia, dirty syringes, scorched spoons, and small plastic baggies containing residue of white powder. "Looks like a heavy meth habit," Robin said grimly. Michael nodded, his jaw clenched tight. The evidence of drug use coupled with the 911 call painted a horrifying picture of what might be happening in this house. "Let's check upstairs," he said. "Be careful, floor doesn't look too stable." They made their way up the creaking staircase, flashlight beams sweeping back and forth. The upper floor was a maze of small, cluttered rooms. They cleared each one methodically, finding more evidence of drug use but no sign of anyone, or the child they feared might be trapped here. After thoroughly searching the entire second floor, Michael and Robin regrouped at the top of the stairs. Nothing, Robin said, frustration evident in her voice. Could the call have come from somewhere else? Michael frowned, equally puzzled and concerned. Maybe. Let's do one more sweep down here, then we'll have to radio it in as a possible wrong address. They had just reached the bottom of the stairs when a sound froze them in place. It was faint, barely audible over the hum of flies and the creaking of the old house, but there was no mistaking it. A child's voice, weak and frightened, calling out from above. "I'm here," it said. "Please help." The desperation in that small voice sent chills down Michael's spine. He and Robin exchanged a look of horror and determination before racing back up the stairs, guns drawn, ready to face whatever nightmarish scene awaited them. Heart-pounding, Michael took the stairs 2 at a time, Robin close on his heels. They paused at the top, straining to hear any further sounds. "Hello?" Michael called out. "We're the police. Where are you?" For a moment, only silence answered. Then, so faint they almost missed it. "Here, please." Michael and Robin looked at each other and agreed that the voice seemed to be coming from the far end of the hallway. They moved swiftly but carefully, rechecking each room as they went. In one of the rooms there's a balcony. Michael stepped outside and peered to his side, then noticed another door. He waved to Robin, who followed behind. When they reached this door, they found it locked. "Stand back," Michael warned before kicking the door with all his strength. The old wood splintered. He tried again the second time, and the door flew open. The beam of Michael's flashlight swept the room, revealing a sight that would haunt him for years to come. Huddled in the corner, chained to an old radiator, was a small boy. He wore nothing but a pair of tattered blue shorts, his emaciated body a map of bruises and sores. The child's head lolled to the side, his eyes struggling to focus on the officers. Even in the dim light, Michael could see how sunken those eyes were, set deep in a face gaunt from starvation. The boy's scalp was a patchwork of roughly shorn hair and angry red cuts, as if someone had taken scissors to his head in a fit of rage. But it was the familiarity of those features that hit Michael like a physical blow. Despite the horrific condition, he recognized the shape of the nose, the curve of the chin, and those eyes, a striking blue he knew all too well. "Oh, God," Michael choked out, his legs nearly giving way beneath him. "Nate?" The boys looked up at the call of his name. His cracked lips moved, forming words with obvious effort. "Dad, I'm... Nate, do you remember me?" Michael felt the world tilt around him. This skeletal child was his son. The little boy he hadn't seen in 2 years, not since the bitter divorce that had torn his family apart. "Of course I remember you, buddy," Michael managed to say, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I'm here now. We're going to get you out of here." As Robin called for immediate medical assistance, Michael knelt beside his son, hands shaking as he examined the heavy chain and dog collar, binding Nate to the radiator. The metal had rubbed the boy's skin raw, leaving angry red marks around his neck and ankle. "Water," Nate whispered, his parched voice barely audible. Michael's eyes fell on a nearly empty plastic bottle lying nearby, the only sign that anyone had provided even the barest sustenance to the child. He held it to Nate's lips, letting him take small sips. "Easy, buddy," he murmured. "Help is on the way. You're safe now." As the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, Michael fought to contain the rage and guilt threatening to overwhelm him. How could this have happened? How did the boy make the phone call? His thought shifted to regret. Why hadn't he fought harder for custody after Sarah's drunk driving incident? The questions swirled in his mind, but he pushed them aside. Right now, all that mattered was getting Nate the help he desperately needed. As the paramedics prepared to move Nate onto the stretcher, Michael's eyes fell on something tucked beneath the radiator. He bent down and retrieved an old, battered flip phone. "Robin," he called softly, holding up the device. "I think I know how he made the call." Robin came over, her eyes widening as she saw the phone. "Clever boy," she murmured. Michael nodded, a mix of pride and pain in his expression. But why didn't he call earlier? And how did he even get this? Robin spoke in a low voice. "Michael, look at the state of him. He's severely malnourished and dehydrated. It probably took all his strength just to make that one call." Michael's jaw clenched as the implications sank in. "You're right, and he must have been terrified of being caught." Robin nodded grimly. "We'll need to figure out how he managed to get hold of the phone. Once Nate's in better shape, we can ask him directly. My guess? He might have stretched far enough to reach it on that table, even with the restraint around his neck, just out of sheer desperation." Robin pointed to a table not far from the radiator. If there were captors in the room, using the phone would have been incredibly risky. But with the house empty and no clear sense of how long he was left alone, we can't be certain. The phone itself might have valuable information to help us track down whoever did this. Michael looked down at his son, now half unconscious on the stretcher. His eyes opened and closed weakly. He reached for that phone with every ounce of desperation and exhaustion. He shook his head, hand on his chin, his voice breaking. He was on the brink of death, and still, he found the courage to call for help. "He's a fighter, Michael," Robin said softly. "Just like his dad." As they reached the ambulance, Michael slipped the old phone into an evidence bag, knowing it would be a crucial evidence. But more than that, it was a testament to his son's incredible will to survive. Despite everything, Nate had found a way to reach out, to hold on until help arrived. Michael climbed into the ambulance, his heart heavy with the weight of what Nate had endured, but also filled with determination to get to the bottom of this investigation. They had a long road ahead, but he would be there every step of the way, helping his son heal and rebuild the life that had been stolen from him. The house erupted into a flurry of activity as additional officers arrived on the scene. Michael stayed by Nate's side, speaking softly to keep him calm, while the paramedics worked to assess his condition. "BP is dangerously low," one EMT reported. "Severe dehydration and malnutrition. We need to move him into the ambulance ASAP. He'll need intensive care at the hospital. And his limbs." The man in his late 20s gently examined Nate's joints. "There might be some dislocations or joint damage from overextension. We need trauma care on standby." He reached for his phone and called the hospital to prepare. Michael nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I'm coming with him," he said, leaving no room for argument. As they prepared to move Nate outside, Michael became aware of a commotion at the front yard. A crowd had gathered, drawn by the sirens and flashing lights. Some onlookers were openly hostile, shouting accusations about police brutality and overreach. "I've got crowd control," Jensen assured him, squeezing his shoulder supportively. "You focus on your boy. Take Robin with you." Michael nodded and followed the paramedics out of the room, helping lift Nate's stretcher as they carefully made their way downstairs. He noticed the ease with which the paramedics carried him. The boy must not have weighed much, a realization that sent another wave of anguish through him. As they emerged from the house, Michael used his body to shield Nate from the prying eyes of the crowd. He could hear gasps and murmurs as people caught glimpses of the child's condition, but he ignored them, focused solely on getting Nate to the waiting ambulance. Once inside the vehicle, Michael held Nate's hand as the paramedics worked quickly to start an IV and check his vital signs. Their grim expressions told Michael everything he needed to know about the severity of his son's condition. As the ambulance sped towards the hospital, sirens wailing, Michael's mind raced with questions and recriminations. How long had Nate been suffering like this? Why hadn't he pushed harder to see his son after the divorce? The guilt threatened to choke him. "Dad?" Nate's weak voice pulled Michael from his spiraling thoughts. "I'm here, buddy," he said, squeezing Nate's hand gently. "I'm not going anywhere." Nate's eyes, though glazed with pain and exhaustion, locked onto Michael's. "You came," he whispered. "I knew. You'd come." Michael felt tears burning in his eyes. "Always," he promised. "I'm so sorry it took me so long, but I'm here now, and I'm never letting you go again. Now rest ease, son." As the ambulance raced through the city streets, Michael silently vowed to do whatever it took to make things right. He would fight for custody, seek justice against those responsible, and dedicate every ounce of his being to helping Nate heal and recover. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but Michael was determined. He had been given a second chance to be the father Nate deserved, and he wasn't going to waste it. The ambulance tore through the city streets, its siren cutting through the afternoon traffic like a knife. Inside, Michael held tightly to Nate's hand, his eyes never leaving his son's face. The paramedics worked efficiently around them, calling out vital signs and administering fluids through the IV. "BP's still low but stabilizing now," one EMT reported. "Pulse is weak but steady." Michael nodded, only half listening. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions: relief at having found Nate, guilt over not being there sooner, and a simmering rage at whoever was responsible for his son's condition. Michael's thoughts turned to the past 2 years. He remembered the bitter custody battle after Sarah's DUI, how she had used his long hours as a police officer against him. In the end, he had been granted only limited visitation rights, but even those had dried up quickly. Sarah always had excuses. Nate was sick, they had plans, it wasn't a good time. Eventually, Michael had stopped pushing, telling himself it was better for Nate to have stability. Now the full weight of that mistake crushed down on him. "Sir," one of the paramedics interrupted his thoughts. "We're about 2 minutes out from the hospital. They have a trauma team standing by." Michael nodded, gently squeezing Nate's hand. "You hear that, buddy? We're almost there. The doctors are going to take good care of you," he said softly, even though the boy remained deep in unconsciousness. As the ambulance pulled up to the emergency entrance, Michael steeled himself for what was to come. He knew the next few hours and days would be critical, but he was determined to be there for Nate every step of the way, no matter what it took. The back doors of the ambulance flew open, and a team of doctors and nurses swarmed around the gurney. Michael tried to follow as they wheeled Nate into the ER, but a firm hand on his arm held him back. "Sir, you need to let them work," a nurse said gently. "I promise we'll update you as soon as we can." Michael watched helplessly as Nate disappeared through the double doors, feeling as if a piece of his heart had been torn away. He slumped against the wall, the adrenaline that had been carrying him suddenly draining away. A familiar voice cut through his daze. "Michael!" It was Robin, jogging towards him from a police cruiser. "How is he? Any word yet?" Michael shook his head, running a hand over his face. "They just took him in. God, Robin, he looked so small, so broken. How could this happen?" Robin placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out, partner. Right now, let's focus on Nate. Have you called anyone, your ex-wife?" The question jolted Michael back to reality. There were calls to make, procedures to follow. He was both a father and a police officer, and somehow he needed to navigate both roles. As they walked into the hospital waiting room, Michael took a deep breath, trying to center himself. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them. For Nate's sake, he had to be strong. The emergency room waiting area was a blur of activity, but to Michael, time seemed to crawl. Every minute felt like an hour as he waited for news about Nate's condition. Robin sat beside him, a steady presence offering silent support. After what felt like an eternity, a doctor in scrubs approached them. "Family of Nathan Rodriguez." Michael shot to his feet. "Yes, I'm his father. How is he?" The doctor's expression was serious but not without hope. "Your son is in critical condition, but he's stable for now. We're treating him for severe malnutrition, dehydration, and multiple infections. He also has several healing fractures that weren't properly treated. We've noticed joint damage in his upper limbs, but we'll need an X-ray to assess the severity." Michael felt his knees go weak. Robin steadied him as the doctor continued. "We're moving him to the pediatric ICU where we can monitor him closely. He's going to need extensive care and rehabilitation, but children can be remarkably resilient. With proper treatment and support, we're cautiously optimistic about his recovery." "When can I see him?" Michael asked, his voice rough with emotion. "We're getting him settled now and we'll schedule him for radiology," the doctor continued. "A nurse will come get you in about 30 minutes. I must emphasize the importance of keeping him calm and undisturbed. His body has endured severe trauma and rest is essential." Michael nodded, trying to absorb all the information. "Thank you, Doctor, for everything." As the doctor left, Michael sank back into his chair, head in his hands. Robin squeezed his shoulder. "He's alive, Michael. He's getting the best care possible. That's what matters right now." Michael nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The relief of knowing Nate would survive warred with the horror of what his son had endured. And underneath it all, a gnawing guilt ate at him. He should have checked on him more often. He should have protected his boy. When the nurse finally came to escort them to Nate's room, Michael steeled himself for what he might see. The pediatric ICU was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors. Nate lay in a bed that seemed far too large for his small frame, tubes and wires connecting him to various machines. Michael approached the bed slowly, his heart breaking anew at the sight of his son's battered body. Nate's eyes fluttered open at his approach, a weak smile tugging at his cracked lips. "Dad?" Nate's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, buddy," Michael reassured him, leaning in close. "We're at the hospital. You're going to be okay." Nate's eyes, sunken in his gaunt face, struggled to focus on Michael. "I tried to be brave," he mumbled, "like how you used to teach me." Michael felt his heart constrict. "You were so brave, Nate. Braver than anyone should ever have to be. I'm so proud of you." As Michael sat vigil by Nate's bedside, a doctor in a white coat approached the room. He knocked lightly before entering. "Mr. Rodriguez," the doctor said, "I'm Dr. Patel, the pediatric radiologist. We need to take Nathan for some additional scans. We're concerned about potential joint damage." Michael nodded, his brow furrowed with worry. "Of course, whatever he needs." Nate stirred at the voices, his eyes opening slowly. "Dad?" he mumbled, a note of fear in his voice. "I'm here, buddy," Michael reassured him, taking his hand. "The doctors need to do some more tests. Is it okay if I come with you?" Nate nodded, visibly relaxing. "Please don't leave me," he whispered. "I won't," Michael promised. "I'm coming with you." A nurse arrived with a wheelchair, and they carefully helped Nate into it. Robin, who had been standing quietly in the corner, offered to come along for support. As they made their way to radiology, Michael pushed Nate's wheelchair while Dr. Patel explained the procedure. Robin walked alongside, her presence a comforting constant. The scan itself took about an hour, during which Michael never left Nate's side, holding his hand and offering quiet words of encouragement. When it was over, they returned to a small consultation room to await the results. Dr. Patel entered, his expression serious. "We've found evidence of joint damage in Nathan's shoulders and elbows," he explained. "It appears to be due to overextension." Michael felt a surge of anger at what his son had endured. "What does this mean for his recovery?" he asked. "With proper physical therapy, we're hopeful for a full recovery," Dr. Patel assured them. "But it will take time and patience." As they processed this information, Robin suddenly spoke up. "Nate, honey," she said gently, "I know this might be hard to talk about, but do you remember how this might have happened? Were you reaching for something?" Nate's brow furrowed in concentration. The phone," he said softly. "It was on the table. I had to stretch really far to get it." Michael and Robin exchanged a look of understanding. The phone that had been Nate's lifeline had also caused him injury. Just then Michael's phone buzzed. It was a text from Jensen. "We got them. 2 arrests at the house. Woman claims to be Nate's mother. Call me when you can." He glanced at the screen and considered. "I need to make a phone call," he said to Robin, who nodded. Stepping into the hallway, he dialed Jensen's number. "Talk to me," he said as soon as she picked up. "What's going on?" Jensen's voice was tight with controlled anger. "It's bad, Michael. We found Sarah, your ex-wife, and a man she claims is her boyfriend. The house was full of drug paraphernalia, mostly meth. They're both clearly users." Michael closed his eyes, leaning against the wall for support. "And Nate? Did they say anything about what they did to him?" The boyfriend was disturbingly candid, Jensen said, her disgust evident. I think it is better you head down to the station if that's possible. Yes, I need to see them, Michael confirmed, a cold fury building in his chest. I need to look them in the eye and ask how they could do this. When he got back to the observation room, Michael's heart raced. He knew he needed to go to the station, but the thought of leaving Nate tore at him. Returning to the room with his son, he explained the situation. Nate, buddy, I need to go to the police station for a little while. Is it okay if Robin stays here with you? Robin chimed. Yes, I'll stay with you, Nate. I'm your dad's longtime partner and we do everything together. I won't leave you. Nate looked uncertain for a moment, but then nodded bravely. Okay, Dad, you'll come back soon. As soon as I can, Michael promised, leaning down to kiss Nate's forehead. I love you, buddy. Love you too, Dad, Nate replied. And Michael, Robin called before he exited the room. Take the cruiser with you, but be careful. You're too close to this case. Don't get over your head. Your career is not worth risking. I will, Robin. Thank you for everything. As Michael left, he felt the weight of his dual responsibilities, to his son and to justice, pulling at him. But he knew that facing what awaited him at the station was necessary to ensure Nate's safety and begin the long process of healing for both of them. Despite Robin's warnings, Michael found himself unable to steady his mind once he reached the precinct. The need for answers, for some kind of explanation, drove him like a physical force. The familiar buzz of activity in the station felt surreal, as if Michael was moving through a dream. Officers nodded to him solemnly as he passed, word of Nate's rescue having spread quickly through the department. Jensen met him at the door to the holding cells, her expression a mix of sympathy and concern. Michael, are you sure about this? You don't have to do this now. He nodded grimly. I need to see them, Jensen. I need to understand. With a sigh, she led him down the corridor. The harsh fluorescent lights cast everything in a sickly glow, adding to the surreal atmosphere. They stopped in front of a cell, and Michael's breath caught in his throat. Sarah sat on the narrow bunk, her knees drawn up to her chest. She was almost unrecognizable from the woman he had married years ago. Her face was gaunt, cheeks sunken, skin marred by the telltale sores of long-term meth use. She stared blankly at the wall, showing no reaction to their presence. Beside her sat a man Michael had never seen before, presumably the boyfriend. He was rail-thin, with greasy hair and a patchy beard. Unlike Sarah, he met Michael's gaze with a defiant glare. Well, if it ain't the hero cop, the man sneered. Come to gloat? Michael gripped the bars of the cell, his knuckles turning white. Why? He managed to choke out. How could you do that to a child? To my son? The boyfriend grinned. Ah, you must be the father, huh? It was me who chained the boy to the place. He shrugged, a casual gesture that made Michael's blood boil. Kid was always whining, always in the way, disturbing mine and my girlfriend's peace. We won't care if you take him. He is a burden anyway. Had to shut him up somehow. How long have you kept him locked in that room? You could have called me, Michael said, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. If you didn't want him, I would have taken him in a heartbeat. The man let out a harsh laugh. He didn't answer Michael's first question. Yeah, right. And have the cops sniffing around? With all the stuff we had in the house, you must be dumber than you look. Michael's grip on the bars tightened, his whole body trembling with the effort of not reaching through to strangle the man. You nearly killed him, he growled. He's 8 years old, 6 when I left him. Michael stood before the cell, struggling to contain his anger. The boyfriend's sneer widened. He leaned forward, his voice low and taunting. You want to know how it all started, officer? How your perfect little family fell apart? He chuckled darkly. It was just another night at the bar. Your wife was there, looking all sad and lonely. Said she was just divorced. Her cop husband was an alcoholic, drunk himself to a car accident. Michael's fists clenched at his sides, but he remained silent, letting the man continue. That night, if you know what I mean. But the real magic, that was when I introduced her to meth. You should have seen her face, man. It was like she'd found religion or something. He leaned back, a satisfied smirk on his face. After that first taste, she couldn't get enough. Of the drug or of me. We've been together ever since. Guess she found something better than playing house with a self-righteous cop and taking care of a boy alone by herself. Michael's voice was barely more than a growl. You destroyed her. You took her away from her son. The boyfriend shrugged. Hey, I didn't force her to do anything. She made her choice. If you'd been a better husband, a better father, maybe things would have been different. But you weren't, were you? Stop playing hero cop. You're just as bad as me. You with your alcohol and me with my babies. Michael's control snapped. He lunged forward, reaching through the bars to grab the man's shirt. You son of a... Strong hands pulled him back. It was Jensen and a few other officers, her voice urgent in his ear. Michael, stop. This isn't helping anyone, least of all Nate. The boyfriend's laughter echoed in the cell block as Robin led Michael away. That's right, run away. Go play daddy to the kid you abandoned. See how long it lasts this time. Michael shrugged off the officer's hand, his whole body shaking with rage and guilt. The man's words had hit too close to home, dredging up all the doubts and regrets he'd been wrestling with since finding Nate. Michael, Robin said softly, don't let him get to you. He's trying to push your buttons. Remember, Nate, he needs you. The mention of his son's name was like a bucket of cold water. Michael released his grip, stumbling back. He looked at Sarah one last time, searching for any sign of the woman he had once loved. Finding nothing, he turned away. The boyfriend laughed as they walked away from the cells. Jensen placed a comforting hand on Michael's shoulder. You okay, partner? Michael shook his head. No, he admitted, but I will be. I have to be, for Nate's sake. They reached the main area of the station, and Michael paused, taking a deep breath. I'm sorry for losing it back there, he said. I needed to understand, but I don't think I ever will. Robin nodded sympathetically. Some things defy understanding, Michael. What matters now is moving forward. Nate needs you to be strong. Just then, Michael's phone buzzed. It was a text from the hospital. Is everything okay at the station? Nate's looking for you. A small smile, the first in what felt like days, tugged at Michael's lips. I've got to go, he told Jensen. I need to get back to my son. With every step he took out of the station, and with every miles he drove towards the hospital, towards his son, he felt Michael's determination grow stronger. Whatever it took, he would help Nate heal, both physically and emotionally. They would build a new life together, one day at a time. The pediatric ward was quiet as Michael made his way back to Nate's room. The soft beeping of monitors and the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum, the only sounds breaking the pre-dawn stillness. He paused outside the door, taking a deep breath to center himself before entering. Nate was chatting with Robin, his blue eyes, so like Michael's own, alert despite the lateness of the hour. A nurse was adjusting his IV, speaking to him in soft, soothing tones. Look who's here, the nurse said with a smile as Michael entered. I told you your dad would be back soon. Nate's face lit up, a shadow of his old smile breaking through the weariness and pain. Dad, he said, his voice still weak but clearer than it had been. You came back. Michael's heart clenched at the note of surprise in Nate's voice, a stark reminder of how much time they'd lost. Of course I did, buddy, he said, settling into the chair beside the bed. I promised I'd be here, didn't I? And I always keep my promises. The nurse finished her checks and quietly excused herself, and Robin too, leaving father and son alone. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between them. Finally, Nate broke the silence. I missed you, Dad, he said softly. I wasn't sure if you'd remember me. Michael felt tears prick at his eyes. He reached out, gently taking Nate's small hand in his own. Nate, listen to me, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I have thought about you every single day since I last saw you. There hasn't been a moment when I didn't miss you, when I didn't wish I could see you. Nate's lower lip trembled. But you never came, he whispered. Mom said, she said you didn't want me anymore. Michael felt the words cut deep like a knife to his heart. Oh, buddy, he murmured, that was never true. Not for a single second. I wanted nothing more than to be with you, but things between your mother and me, they were complicated. Do you remember when I used to visit every weekend? Your mum would say I only brought problems and instability, saying it made you upset and you didn't well in school and missing sleeps. Then I thought, perhaps it's better if I don't show up. I should have fought harder, should have found a way. I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. Tears spilled down Nate's cheeks, and Michael gently wiped them away with his thumb. I'm here now, he continued softly, and I promise you, Nate, I'm not going anywhere. We're going to get through this together, okay? Nate nodded, his small hand tightening around Michael's. What's going to happen now? He asked, a tremor of fear in his voice. Where's Mom and Lucas, her boyfriend? Michael took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. Your mom is safe now. She's at my station. The police are still investigating what happened, but I can assure you she'll be placed in rehab to recover from the drugs, and that man, you don't need to worry about him. You won't have to see him again. I'm so scared of him, Dad. He locked me in the room and yelled at me whenever I made a sound. Sometimes he... Nate stopped him right there, saying, You don't have to keep going. The police will make sure he spends a long time behind bars. He ran his hand over his son's hair. What's important now, we're going to focus on getting you healthy and strong again. The doctors and nurses here are going to help with that. And I'll be right here with you, every step of the way. And after, Nate pressed, where will I go? You'll come home with me, Michael said firmly. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure of that. We'll find a new place to live, just the two of us, and we'll build a new life together. A flicker of hope appeared in Nate's eyes. Really? You want me to live with you? More than anything in the world, buddy, Michael assured him. I know it might be scary and there's a lot we'll need to figure out, but we'll do it together, okay? Nate nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Okay, he whispered. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Michael gently kissed Nate's hair. He could see his son fighting to stay awake, eyelids growing heavy. Get some rest, Nate, Michael said softly. I'll be right here when you wake up. As Nate drifted off to sleep, Michael leaned back in his chair, his mind racing with all that needed to be done. He would need to talk to his captain about taking leave from work. There would be custody hearings to navigate, therapy appointments to schedule, and a new home to find. The road ahead would be challenging, but Michael was ready to face it head-on. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Robin holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Michael before settling into the chair next to him. How's he doing? She asked quietly, nodding towards the sleeping Nate. Better, Michael replied. Still a long way to go, but he's strong. He's going to get through this. Robin nodded, studying her partner's face. And how are you holding up? Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. Honestly, I'm terrified, angry, guilty, but mostly I'm just grateful he's alive, and that I have a chance to make things right. You're going to be a great dad, Michael, Robin said softly. Nate's lucky to have you. Michael smiled wryly. I hope you're right. God knows I've made plenty of mistakes. We all have, Robin pointed out. What matters is what we do going forward. And I know you, partner. You're going to give that boy everything you've got. They sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping their coffee and watching the first rays of dawn creep through the hospital window. Hey, Robin, he said softly, not wanting to wake Nate. Yeah? Thank you for everything. I couldn't have gotten through this without you. Robin smiled, squeezing his shoulder gently. That's what partners are for. And don't worry, I'll be here to help with whatever you and Nate need going forward. As Robin left to start her shift, Michael turned his attention back to his sleeping son. He marveled at the strength and resilience Nate had shown in the face of unimaginable hardship. Despite everything he had been through, there was still a spark of the happy, curious boy Michael remembered. "We're going to be okay, buddy," he whispered, gently squeezing Nate's hand. "It won't be easy, but we'll figure it out together. I promise." And as the new day dawned, bringing with it the promise of healing and new beginnings, Michael allowed himself to truly believe those words. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but with love, patience, and determination, he and Nate would build a new life together, one day at a time.